Welcome to another episode of Find Your Free, the podcast. I am your hostess, Rachel Voss, and here we are, week 15 or episode 15 already. It feels like just yesterday because it really, literally was. Just yesterday, just before the end of 2020 when I decided, all right, I'm going to do this. I thought about a podcast for years. Actually used to think more of being a guest or like a co-host. But, this past December, I got the mental download, if you would, to go ahead and make this happen. And now it's 15 episodes later, and here we are. So thank you to everyone who has been on this journey with me so far, who listens to these episodes, who shares these episodes. I'm so glad that you find a good word and that you're here on this journey with me. And so, let's just continue to go. Let's continue to grow and see where this journey takes us. So today's episode is inspired by a restorative yoga workshop I had the beautifully blessed opportunity to take last Thursday. So in the yoga world, there is a book called Restore and Renew by the wonderful Judith Lasater. Judith Lasater is also the founder of Yoga Journal. So if you know the premier sort of trade publication for the yoga industry, Yoga Journal was founded, I believe, in the late 70s. And Judith Lasater was the founder of that magazine. But she is also I won't say the creator, but she is the one who pretty much put restorative yoga on the map, on the mat, Freudian slip, right? But who put restorative yoga on the map, MAP. And so when I took my yoga teacher training in 2012 and 2013, her book, Restore and Renew, was one of the materials that we had to have for our training. And now, 9 years later, after getting that book is well worn. I have pages literally falling out of the book. I have highlights everywhere, tabs. I love that book. And I love teaching restorative yoga, as well as being a student of restorative yoga. And so over my yoga teaching life, there have been teachers I have learned about and have wanted to study with. Some I've had the blessing of being able to study with, and some, are still on my vision board, so to speak, of being able to have a chance to sit, as my teacher says, knee to knee with, right? And so Judith Lasater is definitely one of these teachers. She, prior to the pandemic, she would do workshops pretty much across the world, but certainly across the country. But when she would hold them, they'd either be for like periods of time where I couldn't get away, or they were in a location that just wasn't feasible, or just whatever. It was just always like wrong timing. And, as I mentioned in the episodes right before the end of 2020, what a year, it talked about the two sides of what has been the pandemic, right? So certainly there has been challenge and struggle and just everything as far as health and how this pandemic has impacted jobs and families and all of that, right? But then there's been this other side where it's been almost a restoration of sorts, right? So the being able to sit down, the being able to be still, the being able to have this time, with your family and just with yourself, right? Because before the pandemic, I think we can all agree we were all just going, doing. And now the restorative side of this pandemic, the restorative side of the space that we're in, is that now we get to just be, right? And that may not always be comfortable, but it does give an opportunity to just step back. And so with that has come the shift of, obviously not being able to travel and not being able to gather just yet. I'm claiming it will happen soon, but not being able to gather in person in large groups, which is what these trainings usually involve. There's usually anywhere, depending on the size of the training, you can have really small, intimate trainings of like 20, and then you can have like large trainings of like 100. But usually, no matter the size, like all the trainees are huddled together around the teacher. There is no social distancing, whatsoever. And so, these in-person trainings, are not as accessible, or available right now. So now everybody's going online and taking their work online. And with that has come the opportunity for me to be able to experience some of these teachers that just when life was moving around, I wasn't able to sit with. And so Judith Lassiter held this 2-hour restorative workshop on Thursday, this past Thursday. I always forget, like, okay, so I'm now, I think, officially recording on Monday mornings. I'm loving this early Monday morning space. This is now my third Monday morning doing it. I landed in Monday because a Sunday, which was my initial recording day, got away from me. And now I fell into a Monday slot to get it done. And now I'm like, oh, I really like this Monday space. So I think I may be here. So today is Monday, March 15th. And I took this workshop on Thursday, March 11th. So literally last Thursday. I just forget that this pod's in real time, but like not real time, depending on when you listen to it. So anyway, so I took this restorative workshop, and it was 2 hours. And what's really beautiful about it is that now Judith's daughter, whose name is Lizzie Lassiter, works with her mom and, offering these restorative practices and workshops. And so Judith pretty much talked us through the practice, just giving us insight and wisdom and tips about why restorative yoga is so important and the importance of restorative yoga in terms of healing and nourishing and nurturing ourselves. And so Judith is in one screen, walking us through the practice. And then Lizzie was demonstrating everything and sort of just chiming in with her thoughts and her feedback. And it was just really beautiful to see this mother-daughter duo, like, offering yoga. Like, it's just really, really, really beautiful. And so, so we took some time or they took some time to talk to us as the participants, just about sort of the science behind restorative yoga, what it does for the cells, what it does for the mind, how it settles, the central nervous system. Like, there really is a lot of scientific stuff, not just about or behind restorative yoga, but behind yoga and meditation in general. A lot of great studies out there about how these practices literally can shape brain waves, can shape aspects of the mind that are just wrought with, anxiety and tightness and all of that. And so we talked about that, and then we moved through just 3, maybe 4 at the most restorative postures that we held, from anywhere to 15 to 20 minutes each. And they were just luscious and yummy and juicy. So the whole practice inspired me. And fortunately, that same day that I took the workshop, I was teaching my restorative yoga class that night. So I was able to immediately apply what I had learned. And I really, really, really enjoyed doing that. So much of that workshop inspired me. But there was something that Judith said that has just been really, 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 like, sitting in my spirit and sitting in my heart. And I've just been sharing this over and over and over since I heard it on Thursday. But when she was talking to us about restorative yoga and how it's a practice that really just holds us, right? So every style of yoga has its benefit. Vinyasa is beautiful. Vinyasa is the active yoga. That's the yoga that almost invites cardio in, if you would, but like, it gets the blood flowing, we're moving, we're connecting breath with movement. It's, the active, the physical, well, all of it's physical in a way, but just more, not so much power, because power yoga is its own thing, but it's more active. And then there is power yoga, and then there's hot yoga, and then there's yin, and then there's gentle, and then there's this, and then there's that. So there's all these different styles, and every style has their benefit, because no matter what, the physical practice of yoga is a practice that invites you to come back into your body. It's just a matter of how you decide to do it, right? Do you decide to do it through gentle yoga? Do you decide to do it through chair? Do you decide to do it through hot? Do you decide to do it through all the styles, right? But restorative yoga is really, really, really the squishiest of all the styles of yoga, because really you are using props and pillows and blocks, just all the things that you have, all the yoga tools that you have. You work with what you have. You can use couch cushions. Like, it doesn't have to be the exact, like, a yoga bolster, a yoga block. You can use books and pillows and whatever you have at home. And you use all these props to support you in the various shapes that you hold in restorative yoga. So again, when you're in a vinyasa or just a regular sort of movement practice, right? Where we're actually moving. Again, in restorative, we don't move so much. But when you're in this active moving space, it certainly can be a space that holds you. Again, when you step onto the mat, I always say the mat is my sanctuary. So even stepping into your sanctuary can hold you, right? But sometimes the idea of the movement, or even of a yin yoga practice, which doesn't require movement, I actually call yin the cousin to restorative, because they're both similar in that they're both styles that ask you to just sit for a while. But with restorative, the postures are so juicy and so squishy, you can go to like 20 minutes. You can even go longer than that in some of those postures. Yin, you're usually out of there by like 5, 6, maybe 7, maybe 10 minutes, depending on the posture. But it is a deeper, more intense rather, form of stretching. And so there's a little work in that way, whereas restorative is just like, yeah, just get yourself into the shape and just be there. You don't have to find this edge. You don't have to like find this intensity, like just be, which for many, 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 many people, just being is way more challenging than sitting in a posture and holding a deep stretch like in your hips for 5 minutes. It's way more challenging than a 60-minute, vinyasa or power or hot yoga flow. Like just sitting still for 5 minutes can drive folks up a wall, right? Because stillness, for a variety of reasons, is scary. It makes the monkey mind go off. It brings us into thoughts that maybe we weren't aware of. It brings us face to face with stuff that's going on inside of us that maybe we're trying not to deal with. So, in our everyday lives, just by way of being human and having jobs and kids and partners and responsibilities, whatever they are, to some degree, we all have to pay a bill, so we all have some sort of responsibility and things that we're managing. And the more that we have on our plate, the more that we're managing. And so certainly before this pandemic, we're coming and going, we're hustling and bustling, and we're still doing that, right? But now we're doing it maybe more from home, and more from a centralized location as opposed to literally leaving the house and coming and going, right? But still, we have adjusted, as best as we could in this space. And now it's like, okay, so now the new hustle is the at-home hustle, right? And so we're just still in that space of going. And so I say all that to say that just being human, right? Just the general act of being human, of God willing, waking up and having a day ahead of you. You have stuff you have to do, right? And so you go, and you'll have those moments where you're like, oh my God, you look up and you're like, I haven't even like used the bathroom yet, or I haven't even gotten anything to eat, or I haven't even, like whatever it is, fill in the blank, because you just got up and you went. So when we're constantly like in that space without stepping back and taking a moment to check in, taking a moment, mindful moment, if you would, to just meditate, to breathe, to whatever, to just pause for a moment. When we're constantly in that space of moving and going and doing, as opposed to being, we are not connecting ourselves to maybe what our body is trying to tell us, signals like maybe our body is like, hey, I need you to stop and eat. Hey, I need you to get that glass of water. Hey, I need you to just stop, period. Hey, I need a little bit of sunlight. I need a little bit of air. I need, again, whatever it is that you need. And it's like, or maybe we'll hear these signals, we'll feel these signals because the body will talk to us, physically. But, we can be in that space where we're just going, pushing, and we're just not connecting. And usually the body itself has to sit us down. And that's when we find that we get sick, or we hit a wall, or we have just completely burnt ourselves out. And even though we want to keep going, we absolutely have no choice, right? And then those are the moments where we sit down and we're like, oh, okay, body, this is what you've been trying to tell me. Okay, these are the thoughts that have been, moving through my mind. Not that we want to, because yoga and meditation our practice is that invite us to observe the thoughts, not to be the thoughts, but we still want to notice, right? We still want to notice like what's going on. And so when we finally find that moment of stillness is when we can connect with like, oh, hey. And then sometimes that constant moving, that constant doing, that constant hustling, that constant running is a running from. You may know the things that are going on inside of you, but you don't want to deal with it. But guess what? The body still does. The body's just like, well, this experience is inside of me. And until you are willing or ready to face it, it's just going to sit here. And one day it's going to show up as anxiety. One day it's going to show up as a pain in your lower back. One day it's going to be a headache that just won't go away. But whatever it is, it's going to be here until you deal with it. So that was a long roundabout way to come back to the beauty of restorative, because it allows us to just sit in stillness and silence and to just be. And, sometimes when we're in those spaces, again, thoughts may come up, things may come up that, we don't want to face, that we didn't realize were there. But the thing is, we want to have that awareness, right? We want to know, like, it's part of what's called the shadow work. So all of us, none of us are perfect, right? Some of us have done the work and are in more healed and positive places in our lives. Some of us are still doing the work. Some of us have to get on the path, but all of us have the term I love to use, is bits and bops. So all of us have bits and bops, parts of us, pieces of us that may not be, spaces, places, things about ourselves that we want to bring to the light. So we keep them in the shadow. For example, your favorite yoga teacher, as I like to call myself, as upbeat and positive and, as just as upbeat as I can be. Like, your favorite yoga teacher has a temper. Your favorite yoga teacher definitely has a sharp tongue. Your favorite yoga teacher is a Scorpio, and there is energy, intense energy, passionate, as I like to call it, energy that comes with that. Your favorite yoga teacher, as I've shared in previous episodes, is an only girl, is the baby girl. So I was certainly, I shouldn't say certainly, but I was spoiled, kind of coming up, because it was just like, she's the only one. And so my brothers and my mom, so and those ways can show up where it's just like, I want what I want, because as a kid, it was just like, oh, give her what she wants. She's the only girl. Let's make her happy, And so then you get older and you're like, I want what I want. And life is like, yeah, nah, it don't work like that. So, we all have our ways, and there are relationships or situations or places that will bring the shadows out in a not healthy way. Those are the things that can help us even realize we even have shadows, But once we do know these parts of ourselves, like, sometimes we spend so much time just trying to, like, I don't want anybody to see that, I don't want anybody to know that part of me is there. I don't like that part of me. But, if we just put it away and act like it's not there, we're almost giving it power, right? The power is in the knowledge, and knowing what's going on inside of ourselves, because then it's not so much that we can control it, but we can decide how to work with it. We can decide how to respond to it, And I don't say control, because sometimes, things just pop up as like a trauma trigger. Again, there are things that may have happened when we were little, just somewhere along the way, that just got deeply embedded, and we don't know it's there until something has caused it to pop out, to show up, in this world. So we may not always be able to control the stuff that's going on. Life happens, and we may just have this immediate, like, knee-jerk response or reaction to things. But generally speaking, once we are aware of all the different facets of us, then we are in a position to say, okay, I'm not going to choose to give into that. Like, for me, finally at this age of 43, I had to really learn, like, what does it look like when my temper is about to show up? Because I'm a person that's usually upbeat and, usually has a sunny disposition, I would say. I am one of these people that it can take a while for things to build up. It's like, I'll notice something, I'll push it to the side, I'll say, okay, I'll be cool about it, I'll just try not to deal, I'll try not to whatever. And then, something will build up and build up and build up. And then what happens is, like, it'll be something small, but it'll be the thing that kind of is like, I've never played Jenga. Officially, I've never played it, but I've seen how it's played. And so it'll be that one thing that you pull that makes the whole thing, tumble down. And that thing, compared to what I'm putting away and trying not to deal with that one thing may be small in comparison to some of the other things I chose not to respond to, but it's just the ultimate pileup of things, right? And then that's the space where like I might just shoot off, or I might just say something or whatever. And I'm just responding from that place of heat, right? That's what a temper is. A temper is a place of like heat. And in Ayurveda speak, it's our pitta. Our pitta is in overdrive. Pitta is the heat. And so now, when I was younger and I would just have these moments, and then whatever it was that made me kind of snap off, I just snap, and then I'd feel really bad about it because, kind of snapping off is not my nature. It's a part of me, but it's not my nature. It's not my everyday thing. So when I would do that, then I'd have these like moments, hours, days, just moments of like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I said that. How could I get so angry? And then it'd just be this vicious cycle until I was out of it, and then back to my upbeat ways, and then something would happen again. And, then I'd have my temper. So what I have learned though is what I can feel the heat like in my body, right? So when you're not aware, and you're just going, and then the thing happens that makes you kind of pop off, but then as you become aware, you notice when something is said to you or something is done or you experience something that makes you feel like, that is not right, or something that does contribute to the heat, and you start to feel that heat in your body. And I remember my therapist had pointed this out to me a while ago, like, Rachel, you can feel the heat, like your body's letting you know, like it's getting to a territory. It's getting into a space. And so now when I feel that heat starting to rise, because that's literally what heat does, heat rises. When I feel that heat starting to rise, it's like, okay, I'm noticing this, right? Something is triggered inside of me. Something is not feeling good. Let me go take a walk. Let me go sit down. Now, it doesn't mean not to deal with that. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean not to deal with that, but it means like, let me just step back and see what's happening here so that I don't end up taking down anybody in the crossfire, which is usually what can happen, right? When we're just like not mindfully responding to the heat. That's, again, when we say things we don't mean, we can say hurtful things because we're feeling hurt, we're feeling whatever it is in the moment, and we're projecting that heat onto others. And so when we can stop and have that moment of awareness, we can recognize that and step back and not let the heat take over. So again, bringing this back to the beauty of a restorative practice, and I still haven't said what Judith Lassiter said that inspired this whole podcast, right? Just quick sidebar. David, my love, always laughs at me because he's like, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you sit down and have one thought and then you just go in all these different directions. And then like 40 minutes later, you come back to the original thought you had at the beginning and make it somehow tie all together. And I'm like, I don't know either, because in the moment it feels like, what am I doing? But somehow it seems to pull together. So I'm glad for that. I'm blessed for that. But anyway, so tying it back to the restorative practice, again, is a space that allows us to just sit and to notice. And sometimes it does mean noticing the uncomfortable things, right? Noticing some of the truths that maybe we don't want to notice, whether it's about ourselves, whether it's something that somebody told us that we thought we let go of, but we're still holding on to it, all these different things. But again, these are things that we want to be aware of so that we can really do the work and the art of healing. We can't heal what we don't know needs to be healed, right? Otherwise it doesn't mean to not be in a space of like proactively just like approaching things from a healing perspective. But if there are things that actually physically need to be healed, or emotionally need to be healed, and we're not aware of them, then how can we do the healing work? So a restorative practice allows for that. It allows for that space. It allows for that stillness. It really helps to renew the body down to a cellular level. So it is and again, I probably use this word 2 or 3 times already, but it is I love to call it a squishy practice. It's just good for the joints. It's good for the tissue. It's good for the nerves. It's good for the mind. It's just a beautiful practice. So as we were getting ready to settle in for the first restorative posture in this practice, Judith talked about the idea of refuge. And she said, we tend to look as refuge, as like a destination, as a place that we have to get to. I have to get away from this and seek refuge. I have to go to this place to find my refuge. I have to get out of this house, go to an island, which is what I say, to find my refuge, right? And certainly there is something to be said about shifting the energy of your environment, right? So if your environment is a place that isn't healthy or isn't conducive to creativity or isn't in a space that's supportive, maybe it's a temporary thing and you just need to step away for a moment. Maybe it's a larger situation and you have to step away, on a larger level. But whether smaller scale or larger scale, sometimes our current environment can be a space that we're just not getting inspiration from. And so we go outside, we go away for a couple of days, we go to a place that inspires us. We go to a place that allows us to drop in, to reconnect. So certainly there is something to be said about the destination of refuge, right? But in terms of like our everyday lives, right? In terms of applying the quote unquote yoga, to our everyday lives off the mat. If I haven't said it here, I'm pretty sure I have because I say it ad nauseum when I'm teaching. 99% of our yoga practice is what happens in life off the mat. You can show up to your mat every single day, 3 times a day for 60 minutes per practice, right? And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, especially if it's with intention and connection. But that's still just 1% of the overall yoga practice, right? What we do on the mat is just a physical aspect of the full path of yoga. Yoga is an 8-limb path that requires self-study, that looks at how we deal with ourselves, that looks at how we deal with the world in terms of morals and ethics. It helps us with meditation. It helps us with self-focus, self-contemplation, all of it together to help us find this path of enlightenment, this sense of enlightenment, nirvana, if you would, right? So what we do in that physical practice, our asana, which is that physical practice, is just 1%. It's there, to support us physically. Really, the asana in the limbs of yoga, in the system of yoga, really asana is to help prepare our bodies for meditation, to bring the body to a place where we can settle, where we can sit. But all of that is to support us in our lives off the mat, right? So how we respond to challenging yoga postures, how we respond to tension in the physical body, all of that gives us insight as to or into how we deal with tension in life and anxiety, off the mat. So what we experience in our lives is 99%, of our yoga practice. And so when we look at this idea of refuge in terms of our everyday lives, how can refuge be a place that we find in our everyday lives? Like, how can we seek, as Judith said it so beautifully, how do we seek refuge in? How do we seek refuge in, as opposed to refuge being this destination, right? Refuge being separate and apart from us. How can we sort of become one, to sound like a true yoga teacher, with refuge? And so some beautiful examples she gave are, taking refuge in, or seeking refuge, right, in the first beautiful bite of a crisp apple, or taking refuge in sitting outside in the sun for just a few moments, or sitting in a beautiful restorative posture that just feels squishy and supportive. Taking refuge in, a cup of tea. So right now I have my herbs that I'm blending. And when I sit, and have these moments with my tea, with my herbal blends, it really is a space, like every sip just feels so cozy for me, right? And so sometimes we have these rituals or these things that we do. Maybe you're already one who gets up and the first thing you have in the morning is a cup of tea with a quiet moment. And maybe that's just something that you do, but you don't realize that's something you find refuge in. How can we take these little everyday things that we do and turn them into ritual, and turn them into self-love practices, and turn them into self-care practices, and then ultimately they become the things that we seek refuge in. And so when she said that, I just absolutely love that. With all this yoga I teach and all the meditation I teach, I do talk about, the body and the mind. We do these practices so that we can help the body and the mind be safe spaces that we can return to, or so that there's safe spaces that can help us along our healing journey. Because again, the body, I'm going to literally say the title of a book, but there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And it does. The body is the container for all, of our life experiences. So it takes in everything, it takes in everything. And so we want to, when we take our daily practices and turn them into ritual, those are the things that can help to make our bodies and our minds a safe space that ultimately we can find refuge in as well. So it's not just a cup of tea, but it's like, how can I sit with myself? Like, my refuge is my meditation practice. My refuge is sitting in a shavasana or a restorative yoga posture or a child's pose, or just sitting, comfortably, no music, no nothing, just me and myself. And I seek refuge in that. I take 5 minutes for that every day, 10 minutes, whatever it is, and seek refuge in that. When our minds, and this was, it's beautiful because I took the restorative workshop on Thursday, and then I've mentioned that I'm in a rites of passage program for women, and we had our March workshop just last night, so Sunday night. And that idea of seeking refuge seeking refuge in was further supported or compounded by what we talked about a little bit in our rites of passage last night. It was a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful session, right? We talked about vision and getting clear on our visions, and how it's more than just a vision board. That was a gem, and I'm probably going to come back to that at some point in a podcast episode down the line, because that was like, whew, there's definitely hopes and dreams that I've cast upon a vision board and then just left it on the vision board, just thinking the vision board would make it happen. And certainly a vision board is a tool, but visioning, as I've learned, certainly last night, is a lot more than that. But when we were talking about the idea of getting clear on our visions, the sister leading the rites of passage talked about like getting our minds to a space where it's safe and clear. And so and anybody who's listening to this or who's practiced yoga may have heard this somewhere along the line. There's just certain things in the yoga world that we just hear over and over and over because they're really beautiful examples, right? So we talk about mindfulness, mindful moments, mindful this, mindful, and mindful is one word, mindful. And being mindful is the practice of being present with every single moment as it's happening. So if you're listening to this podcast on 2:00 on a Tuesday, like that's all that's happening right now is you're listening to a podcast on 2:00 on a Tuesday, and you are noticing what my voice sounds like in your ear. Maybe you're noticing the birds chirping outside, like anything that's happening in this moment, noticing that is the act, the art, the practice of mindfulness. Then there's there's mindful, and then there's mindful, mindfull, which is like your mind is full of just all the things, which my mind is all the time. I definitely have a vata mind. It's just constantly moving, constantly thinking. I'm constantly wondering, and so that's just a design of me. But my work is having to get my mind to a bit of a more calm, cool, and collected place. And so when the sister was talking about mindful versus mindful, and our mind being full of just stuff, I wish I'm like physically making this like motion right now that y'all can't see, but our mind is just full of stuff. And when our mind is constantly on, it actually might not feel like a safe space. It doesn't feel like a place where you can take refuge. It's a place that may cause anxiety. It's a place that may cause that heat, that anger, depending on what the mind is full with, right? So we've got to get the mind to a space where it's calm, and then we can learn to have our mind be a place that we seek refuge in. Same thing with the physical body. If we experience some trauma, maybe physical trauma, some sort of sexual trauma, if we experience some type of trauma, it can disconnect us from our body, because what happens, especially with physical trauma and sexual trauma, it's, we may have this place in our mind where we like, I did this to myself. I put myself in that position. Why was I at this place? Why was I on this date? Like whatever it was that led up to the traumatic event happening. Like, we might blame ourselves for that. And in that blame, we are disconnecting from our body and saying, shame on you, body, for making that happen. Or I'm so mad at you, body, because that happened. Like, you didn't protect me. I couldn't protect you. Whatever it is. And it causes this disconnect. And then when there's that disconnect, your body doesn't even feel like a safe space to come back to, right? So how do we get our bodies and our minds and our emotional body, our spirits, to be safe spaces that we can find refuge in? And again, restorative yoga, meditation, gentle yoga, more of the quieter practices, the quieter mind body practices. So again, not that a vinyasa can't help, not that power yoga can't help, but it's just the idea of really connecting with the body space. And sometimes with vinyasa, and I actually shared this in an Instagram in one of my stories this weekend, but it was just a message that fell on my heart about, we're just in this age and this culture now of like, be vegan, be this, be that, you know what I mean? What's your diet? Da-da-da. Like, just constantly having to like define yourself, right? And I absolutely 1000% agree with making choices, making educated, informed choices that support your wellness. And so if it's like, yeah, I want to shift from, eating, an animal-based diet to a vegetarian diet, like, because I just feel better, by all means do it, right? But if it's like, oh, I don't like my body. Oh, my body, I'm just like constantly trying to get my body to this place that I have to be a vegan so that my body will look like this. I have to be a vegetarian so my body will look like this. I have to, run so that my body will look like this. I have to do these push-ups, all the things that we see, because everybody's doing everything on social media now, right? Again, what has come out of this pandemic. So now everybody's home and everybody's doing all the things, right? And so users or, social media users, or, if you're in one of these places where you're just trying to find your way back to yourself, you might see all these things and feel like, I need to do that for that to happen. And so the story that I shared this weekend is like, if you're trying to sort of just force your body into this space, whether it's through diet or exercise or whatever, because you think it'll make things right, or, like, I dare say, like, that stuff doesn't matter, because it's just a band-aid, you know what I mean? It's just like an armor that you're putting on, but you're going to constantly be finding a new type of armor to put on if you're not getting to the root or to the heart of whatever is causing you to put on that armor, right? So doing the inside work, going on the inside, going into the shadow work, going into those uncomfortable spaces, once you work on that and find that peace and that love and that comfort with the inside, then the outside stuff, then that's when that will really, it'll show. First of all, what happens on the inside shows on the outside, but then you can be in a more conscious and aware place to decide, okay, what is truly good for me as far as my physical body, what I'm feeding it, how I'm working it out, then you can come from that more whole place. And so when it comes to vinyasa and power and hot yoga, I will never knock a yoga style. I may have some I prefer more than others, but I will never knock a yoga style, because there may be some, it's not so much yoga style as it is just like what people have done with the yoga. Like, I don't knock this, but, like goat yoga, beer yoga, naked yoga, like they've taken, there's things that have been taken and added to the yoga to make the yoga a thing, right? So, some of those things I might be like, I don't know about that. But in terms of style, style of movement, I'm not going to knock that, because I have learned, I used to teach in a gym. Taught in LA Fitness for 2 years, and I had anywhere from 40 to 50 people rolling into the 2 classes I taught, each week. And there were a lot of folks that got into the spiritual side of yoga because they came into the gym. They came into the gym just thinking, I want a physical yoga. I don't want to hear any of that woo stuff, right? But the teacher that I am, I'm always going to sneak it in, and whether it's through a passage I read or just, as I'm teaching, like really focusing on that self-awareness. And then some folks who come in through the physical path ultimately find out that they are now on the spiritual side of things, right? So I'm never going to knock a style that invites somebody to yoga But in terms of feeling safe in your body, the more active practices, again, your vinyasa, your power yoga, could feel like you're trying to force your body into something as opposed to inviting yourself to come back home. As I've been saying in my classes lately, it's like your body always has the porch light on. It's waiting for you to come home. It's just a matter of you finding your way there. And so some of the more gentle practices can feel like that invitation, just safe, and something you can sort of hold hands with, if you would, to walk yourself back home. And so that's what a restorative practice allows. It allows us to feel safe in our bodies again. It allows us to feel safe in our minds again. And not just a restorative practice, but some of the more gentle practices, can invite that. And they become these places of refuge, right? So how can our yoga practice become a place of refuge? Now, in that aspect, a vinyasa practice, a power yoga practice, can be like, this is just where I find my peace. Again, just being aware of what's going on in the inside. So, putting that to the side, an active, dynamic yoga practice can certainly be a place where you find refuge. You move, you're pushing yourself to the edge, you're sitting in your edge for a little bit, you're exploring, like, how am I responding to this? Am I breathing? So this is where I find some peace. I take refuge in this 40-minute yoga practice that gets my blood flowing and opens up my lungs and just puts me in a great place for the day. Like, I seek refuge in that, or I seek refuge in Shavasana. So if I took that workshop on Thursday, it was Saturday morning. So I teach an active yoga class on Saturday mornings at 10, and I got up at like 6:30 that day. So I was also teaching an Ayurveda course later that afternoon. So I got up at 6:30 just to have time with my thoughts, to get my presentation together. And then I had some extra time. So I was like, well, I'm going to put myself through, a practice before I teach. And at first I was going to put myself, and usually I do play around with the flow myself before I teach it, but I was going to put myself through the entire thing. But then I said, if I do that, then I turn around and I do it again. That's like 2 hours back to back of like active flow, and I'm going to wear myself out. So I was like, I know, I'll do one of the restorative postures I learned on Thursday, and I'll just sit for 20 minutes. I could use a moment of meditation. And what we did in that restorative practice was practice with no music. So just had to get my little cup of tea there, my sip of tea. Oftentimes, yoga teachers incorporate music with the practice. I specifically like it for the active flow, because I always say if people get lost in the music, they get lost in the movement, and they're not thinking about like, oh my God, I'm holding this plank for 5 breaths. But if it's like a song that you can kind of anchor into, I think that can help. And then when it comes to the quieter practices, I play really quiet music, just nature soundscapes, just very, very, very gentle music. But Judith, said like music can be consumption. It's still something that the mind is taking in, right? So when we don't have music, it just allows us to be one with that silence. It allows us to be one with that stillness. The mind is just not taking in something. It's not producing something. That was something else that was said that I love. Like, when we do our restorative practice and we take these 20-minute, sits in each posture, or even if it's just one, like I did on Saturday morning, of one posture of sitting for 20 minutes, that's 20 minutes of not consuming something, of not taking something in, of not producing, of not thinking like I have to do. Certainly as I was sitting, the monkey mind came, but then I noticed it and I quieted down with my breath. And so I took myself through this 20-minute, no noise, just sitting. And it was so luscious and so wonderful. And I ended up teaching a really great active yoga class. And it's not to say that if I put myself through my active yoga flow, that my class wouldn't have been as great. But I just think that giving myself that moment to settle and to just be, was the energy, that I needed to keep moving on throughout that day. And when I got up, I was like, oh my God, like, I think it was episode 13. Where I talked about choosing joy, and I got up from that sit and I was like, oh my God, that was so much joy. Just being was joyful. Like I didn't have to do something. I didn't have to be dancing. It was just like, no, I just really enjoyed sitting in that space. Like I took refuge in being here, and I found joy from it. And it was awesome. And it just gave me such energy to move through the rest of my Saturday with. So taking refuge in, loves, how can you look at the everyday things? Maybe it's a long shower. Maybe it's an Epsom salt soak bath, or as I talked about in Choosing Joy, taking a spirit bath, with flower petals and essential oils and coconut milk, just really making this bath like a luxurious space. Or even if you don't have all the things, maybe it's just taking refuge in a bath, for sitting in the bath for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is. Maybe in that case you have some soft music playing that just really helps to calm the mind and just makes it a place that feels like refuge. Again, if you get up early in the morning and your first thing is, I gotta have coffee, maybe it's just not a thing that you have to do because I have to have my coffee to work, but as opposed to, or instead rather, look at it as like, I'm gonna wake up, I'm gonna greet the day, I'm gonna have this coffee, and I'm just gonna enjoy this moment with my coffee. I'm not drinking this coffee because I gotta get cranked up for work, I gotta get cranked up for my, it's like, I'm just enjoying this coffee because I like coffee, and I like coffee at 6:30 in the morning. And this is a moment I find refuge in. I talked about in a previous episode about, I'm a strong 10 to 4 kind of person. Like, I feel like that's when I'm most energized. And so I'm one that can struggle with. I've never been a naturally early riser, which is funny because I'm not naturally a hard and long sleeper either. So I can wake up at like 7, but I can't get out to bed, but I also can't go back to sleep. But I'm like, I don't want to move either, right? So last week, last week was like a busy week. And so there were a couple of days I needed to wake up at like 6:30. And I actually did it like on my own. One day I had the alarm, but then a couple of other days I woke up on my own. And I was downstairs, my kid was still asleep, and David was still upstairs, and the house was just quiet. The dog was just quiet. Everything was just quiet. And I lit my incense, and I played my soft music, and I had my tea, and I'm able to just sit. Maybe I did some work, maybe I didn't, but it was just still that quiet space in the morning. And I've heard that so much about why getting up before the family can be super important, because you do get that time. But I really found myself taking refuge in that, right? And so I had done that for a couple of days before that restorative workshop, but it helped me put context around like, man, this does feel yummy. Like this podcast, doing this podcast at 7:00 in the morning as opposed to 4:00 on a Sunday afternoon feels like something I can take refuge in, right? Like I come down, I light my candle, I light my incense, I create this really cozy space, and I enjoy being here. I enjoy being on this mic, talking. I love to talk, sharing a good word, and just doing something that I've always wanted to do. So just looking at the everyday little things that you do that maybe are not so little, that maybe can provide you moments and spaces of refuge. So again, in this world of a pandemic where maybe we can't just jump on a plane or go to a place or, go to that island that I'm always saying I want to go to, because I need to get away. I need a refuge. Like, how can we reframe all of it and let our life, our mind, our body, our everyday practices, our everyday rituals become places, spaces, things we find refuge in? As we learn to do that, loves, that helps to facilitate contentment, which in yoga speak, we call this, in Sanskrit, we call contentment Santosha. Santosha is one of the niyamas. There's the yamas and the niyamas. And the niyamas are how we apply moral and ethical principles to ourselves. And then the yamas are how we apply them to the world. So like one of the yamas is ahimsa. Compassion's my favorite. Having compassion, being non-harmful, non-violent towards others. And then Santosha is more about personal contentment, right? And so much of our lives, especially in this Western world and especially in this current social media, everything is at our fingertips society. It's just like, we get to this place where we feel like we need all of the things to give us a full life. I am totally guilty of that, right? Like the things, quote unquote, may have shifted, but there are still things that I want, things that I search for that I feel like would give me like peace. It's not so much material things so much anymore as it is other things that I don't have control over, right? But I still anchor some of my contentment and my peace to those things. But generally speaking, all of us, if I get that bigger house, I'll be happy. If I get that bigger car, I'll be happy. If I get that job, I'll be happy. If I quit my job, I'll be happy. If I could just get that man, I'll be happy. If I could just go on a date with that woman, I'll be happy. If I could just, get as many Instagram followers as that person has, I'll be happy, right? And the list goes on and on and on. If then, right? That doesn't support contentment, because it is causing us to rely on external circumstances for our happiness. And everything that we need for our happiness is inside of us. We were reminded of that again last night in our rites of passage, right? Like, we were born with everything we need to move through our lives. We were born with knowing, this inner knowing, and then life happens and we get away from that, and our parents and our friends and, the people who are in our lives that may not be aware of the shit that they're carrying, that shapes us, and then ultimately becomes shit we're carrying. And then we end up being 30, 40, whatever it is, like, what the fuck am I doing? Who am I? And you start asking all the questions and you're like, oh my God, I don't know anything. But then that's when we come back to stillness. That's when we come back to that space of silence. That's when we want to start to make the mind a space that's a refuge, because then we can tap into that and find that sense of inner knowing. We know it. It's there. We were each built with our own code, not just DNA, but like for how to function in life, right? But again, we just get away from that. We think we have to seek somebody to help us find the answers. We think we have to take this class, take this course. And certainly, okay, me being a yoga teacher, certainly these things can support us. Teachers, courses, healing, these things can support us, right? But ultimately, nobody can tell you the song of your heart. I can maybe help you tap into it. I can observe you, and, being somebody that's looking at you outside of yourself can say, well, here's what I'm picking up. Here's what I sense. Here's what I feel. And then I might say something that triggers you in a positive way, like, that feels good. I don't know too much about that, but that feels good. That feels right. That sits with me right. And so something I say can spark your inner knowing, but I don't know that, I'm just observing. So only you know what you know. And so when you turn back to that space of like inner knowing, that's where the answers reside, the things that we're searching for, the things, it's within us. We just have to find our way back there. So again, that's why I love the beauty of yoga, of meditation, of these mind-body practices, because like I said about restorative, they're like holding their hands out, to say, hey, hold my hand, or putting their hands out to say, hey, hold my hand and let's take this journey back home. The porch light is on. Let's find our way there. And so when we learn to seek refuge, in our everyday lives, in these small but not so small moments, again, it can help us to find contentment. When we learn to find contentment with the little things, it can take off that pressure, that constant drive to have to find the bigger things. Because if all those things went away and all you had was yourself, again, which is something that 2020 taught us, right? If everything went away and all you have is yourself, how can you find peace in that? How can you find safety in that? So being at peace with yourself, seeking refuge in yourself, being content with yourself will absolutely set you up for a life of fulfillment, a life of contentment, a life of attracting what it is that you truly want, as opposed to just trying to attract all the things that you think will make you happy. Again, certainly there's something to be said about having, money in the bank and, being able to provide for yourself, being able to do the things, right? Like, there is something to be said about that. But before we do all the things, like, let's just learn how to be who we are, our natural, authentic selves that we can find refuge in, that we can find contentment with, and that will set us up for, a life of contentment moving forward. So, man, there is so much. I feel like I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, and this will definitely have to be a conversation I'm going to come back to. I'm still trying to figure out how to bring other people into this podcast, because some of these discussions I would love to have with other people. So keep hanging in there with me for this journey, because I am excited to see how I will make that happen, how I'll be able to bring other people in. And I think, I hope that me alone, I'm able to share something, or that you're able to take something from each of these episodes. But man, how much more of a robust conversation when we have other people in sharing their perspectives as well. So I am one who is all about community with my yoga class, with my Instagram page, even here with this podcast, even though I'm talking and you're listening and there's not so much dynamic interaction, I still look at this as like a community space, and that everybody who is listening is a part, of this community. And so, so I look forward to having other folks from the community come in and share the space with me. All right, lovely. So with that, let's go ahead and get ready to wind it down. We'll take a nice deep breath, and I'll read a poem from Judith Lassiter. I was looking for a passage from one of the books that I usually read from, but Judith read a poem on Thursday, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to read that poem for today's episode. So take a moment to find a comfortable seat. If you're sitting in a chair, bringing your feet to the floor, or a couch, you can bring your feet to the floor. Or if you're on a couch, how I like to sit, maybe you're sitting crisscross applesauce, with the legs crossed on the couch. And either way, couch, chair, feet on floor, find a tall spine, soft shoulders. And if you're lying down, maybe bend the knees to keep a little awareness in the body. Bring the arms out to the side like a T if that feels good, or rest your hands on your heart or belly. And then wherever you are, take a deep breath in. Exhale out. And let's do that 2 more times. Take a deep breath in. Feel the belly, the sides of the body, the lungs, the chest. Exhale, exhale, exhale. And one more time, taking a deep breath in. And exhale. Maybe letting your eyes close if that feels good. And this poem, it's a short poem, but it just feels like a great way to end this podcast. And so this poem is called Settle and Receive by Judith Lassiter. Light is a paradox, both a wave and a particle. This is impossible, but true. Happiness is a paradox too, not an accident nor an achievement. Happiness is already here. It can never be created. Rather, happiness is only discovered when we settle and receive it. Settle and receive the goodness you already possess. Believe this innate goodness. Settle and receive the simplicity of life's biggest paradox of love. Settle and receive the unending love the universe has for you, the love that it has had for you since before you were born. Our only hope in the face of this paradox of love is to open to the glorious singing stillness that lives in our very cells and always has. Even one flash of knowing this paradoxical stillness will banish your fear. Settle and receive it always. So I love that. Settle and receive, which is what a restorative yoga practice really invites, right? And even if it's just, I'm sticking with Vinyasa yoga, Rachel, I'm not doing that restorative thing. Hopefully you'll find your way there. I dare say those who only want Vinyasa are the ones who need restorative. But with the end of every yoga practice, Shavasana is usually always offered. And that's a posture that allows you to settle and receive. And that's why we say that's the posture where everything integrates, right? The movement is what helps us move past resistance, to break through things, to find our edge, to go on this journey of exploring. And then Shavasana is where we come and we lie and we rest and we sit in the stillness and the expansiveness of the stillness. And we just allow ourselves to receive everything that came up from the practice. We allow ourselves to receive the rest. We allow ourselves to receive the settling. So even if you don't jump into a restorative practice, try your Shavasana, try your meditation. Just try a moment, even if it's just for a minute or two, of sitting in silence to allow yourself to settle and receive. And before I end, I would be absolutely remiss if I did not offer and say that if you are looking for yoga, if you are looking for refuge, if you are seeking contentment, if you are just seeking and this podcast found you and it speaks to you, please, please, please connect with me. I teach restorative yoga every single Thursday from 7 to 8, every single Thursday. And I will always hold a space for those who need it, who are facing financial challenges, who are facing mental health challenges. Come take a class on me. Classes are always donated. I have a really beautiful community that is about supporting each other. So there is space for you. So please, please, please reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram at Rachel Voss Yoga, email rachelvossyoga.com. So please find me so I can create a space for you. All right, lovelies, with that, let's go ahead and officially bring this podcast to a close. And I'll say what I always say, which is, may you be happy, may you be free, may you be peaceful, easeful, useful, and joyful. The light in me honors the light in each of you. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you next week.